Okay, I think we're ready to start, folks. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Steve Grippy. I'm the Chief Deputy here in the District Attorney's Office in Sacramento County. We have 6 speakers for you this afternoon, all the elected DAs from their respective counties. Anne Marie Schubert from the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, Tulare County District Attorney Tim Ward, Contra Costa County District Attorney Diana Becton, Santa Barbara County District Attorney Joyce Dudley, Ventura County District Attorney Greg Totten, and Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer. After the last speaker, we will have a short, limited question and answer period. We'll first take questions from the media that's here in the room. We also have set up a remote access for questions from media that are not in the room. We're not sure how that will work. We haven't done that before. I think technologically it will work. The only question is if people choose to remotely question. There will be individual opportunities or opportunities to individually speak with the elected DAs up here on the stage and some of the victims after this short press conference. And we have set up different areas around this room for that to take place. Let's start now with Sacramento District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert.
Today is a historic day in historic times in a historic venue. I want to take a minute to thank President Nelson from Sac State and his entire team here for the incredible effort that they've made, and to thank them for their willingness to allow justice to emerge in this venue today. I want to thank the Sacramento Superior Court and Judge Bowman and all of the court staff that worked tirelessly with the DA's office here to make this day happen here. I want to thank all of law enforcement that came together to provide public safety for everyone here today. To my colleagues, to the elected district attorneys from Northern, Central, and Southern California, for the prosecuting attorneys who have worked on this case tirelessly for many years. This has been an unprecedented and historic multi-county prosecution. To all of the police officers, detectives, and investigators who spent decades, long past retirement in many times, to help get us to this day. To our crime labs and to crime victim advocates across the state of California, and most importantly, to the victims and their families, thank you for being part of what I call Team Justice. This has been a very long journey for justice. It has been said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. For so many, there is little doubt that this journey felt like 1,000 miles. This journey of passion and persistence finally led to this day of reckoning. Robert Louis Stevenson once said, "Sooner or later in life, everyone sits down to a banquet of consequences." This is that day for Joseph DeAngelo. But perhaps most importantly, this has been a journey of hope. Hope of finding light despite all of the darkness of death and destruction and despair that we heard today. For so many victims, finding that light on this journey came at different times, at different places, and in many different forms. But for most, if not all, that journey would not be complete until the rapist and the killer was identified and brought to justice. Hearing the words and the stories of the victims gives but a glimpse of their journeys. For instance, for Jane Carson Sandler, it was a journey of going from frozen in fear to harnessing her strength to tell her story so she might help other rape victims. Turn your mess into a message, turn your pain into power. And for Debbie Domingo, she was 15 years old when she saw the yellow police tape around the house that held the bodies of her mother and Greg Sanchez. For years, nightmares, depression, and drugs took over her life. She was homeless and she was hopeless. And then one day, as Debbie described, God whispered in her ear that he would carry her in her weary soul. It was a day that changed her life. Bruce Harrington once said, "This monster has a reservoir of victims." The Harringtons channeled their grief in 2004 to pass perhaps the greatest DNA databank law in this nation. Before that law was passed, about 1,200 DNA hits had happened, cold hits from DNA. Since that time of that passage in 2004, over 80,000 hits have occurred. Those 80,000 hits represent 80,000 victims. For others, finding that light in this journey came just a little over 2 years ago, when this revolutionary new DNA tool, investigative genetic genealogy, led us to identify and arrest this serial killer and rapist. For so many, the memories came flooding back. For instance, for Michelle Cruz, who was 17 when her best friend and sister Janelle was raped and murdered, she wept for hours after hearing about the arrest. After 32 years, she could finally unlock her bedroom door. In her words, "I can finally breathe again." For Loretta Maggiore, Brian's mom and Katie's mother-in-law, Loretta's now in her mid-80s. In her own words after the arrest, she thought about Brian every single day. Quote, "He would have been 61 years old. I made his killer dead in my mind for so long, I never really thought about it. I just missed my son." For all of the victims and their families, each has their own journey, each has their own story, each look to their own light despite the darkness. For the Sacramento community, the impact this man, the East Area rapist, had was ingrained in our memories. A 50-something-year-old businessman came up to me after the arrest and told me that his parents put tarps on the hallways of their floor so they could hear if the East Area rapist was walking down their hall. A middle-aged woman came up to me and said that she now felt safe to open her windows to feel the Delta breeze. For me, and for so many people in this community that lived here, he was the boogeyman. And then on April 24th of 2018, after his arrest and having sat and watched his interview with law enforcement, the detectives, Kenny Clark, and many others that night, reality set in for many of us. Reality set in for many of us. Joseph DeAngelo isn't just the Visalia ransacker or the East Area rapist or the Golden State Killer. Having sat here today and listened and sat that night of his interview, he is the real-life version of Hannibal Lecter. He is a cruel, intelligent, sadistic serial killer. He is pure sociopath. He is a master manipulator. And then we have today, perhaps even for others, that light came today, that we now have moved this monster not simply from just being caught to now standing convicted. For those of us in this business, every so often you hear a phrase uttered in the hallways of our office or in the confines of the courthouse. A phrase that is often used to describe a moment when justice has emerged. A phrase that simply says, today was a good day for the people. Today was that moment. Today was a good day for the people.
Tulare County District Attorney Tim Ward.
Good afternoon. I will tell you that today was an absolute honor and a privilege on behalf of the Tulare County District Attorney's Office and the men and women in law enforcement in our county to stand with and be present with the victims and the survivors that we were able to see today. Your dedication, your commitment, and your defiance today is what fuels us to do what we do. There is no greater honor as a prosecutor than what we saw today. And so I want to thank the team that Anne-Marie, Ventura, Greg Totten, Joyce, Dudley, and Becton, everybody put together, and Todd Spitzer with the contributions of Orange County DA's lab. It's just phenomenal. I will tell you that when I got the call from Anne-Marie, Greg, you were on the phone as well, that he had been caught. As you know, you heard a little bit today, the Visalia ransacker case were not solved by DNA. It took time for good old-fashioned police work to make the connection. So I want to thank the team that gave us that time to conclude our investigation. I'll tell you that the community in Tulare County, the city of Visalia, is keenly aware that the tragedy and the nightmare that befell this state began in Tulare County, and it still impacts the community today. For many, it's a nightmare they would wish to forget, but yet a memory that will not fade away. But as I stood here today and I was able to support Elizabeth, who was the daughter of Professor Snelling, who was murdered, and see her with her family here today. And Mr. McGowan, the son of Officer McGowan, who was shot when he worked for the Visalia Police Department, to see him here today and be able to be a part of this was truly amazing. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the staff that came today, and the staff that weren't able to be here today. Thank you for what you do. It is truly a privilege and an honor to be a part of this. This is the next step, and I'll finish and conclude with this, that for our case, count one, as you heard, this was always the ultimate disposition. As you know, our case was never eligible for the death penalty. So a conviction which granted life without the possibility to parole was always the ultimate goal in our case. And I can tell you, having an opportunity to speak with our victims and our survivors and families that were here today, they are so thankful to be here today to see that finality, and they are going to be here in August as this continues. So for those others that were here as well, thank you for your commitment, because you give us hope as prosecutors and those victims that will come tomorrow, not only here in the state of California, but across this nation with what this team has created, and we see its impact across the nation. You give hope to everyone out there. Thank you.
The next speaker is Contra Costa County District Attorney Diana Becton.
Good afternoon. For decades, DeAngelo evaded justice, and he devastated communities across California, including his horrific crimes that he committed in Contra Costa County. He committed multiple heinous acts in Contra Costa County. 4 of those cases we were able to charge. While we were not able to file the other cases, we're very fortunate that today DeAngelo pled to all of the cases, those that were charged and uncharged. Not only uncharged cases in Contra Costa County, but around the state of California. Today's court proceeding brings us one step closer to ending the horrific saga of Joseph DeAngelo. His crimes left a lifetime of scars and pain for our victims and for their families. In this case, we know that justice did not move swiftly. It has taken a very long time. However, our victims remain steadfast and brave throughout this entire process. Today is about remembering all of the victims in this case and to finally hold DeAngelo responsible for these crimes. We do want to thank DA Schubert and her amazing team here in Sacramento for handling all of these cases statewide and for helping all of our offices work closely together. I also want to thank the other district attorneys who are also part of this team, our law enforcement partners, and the crime labs. Today, we were able to move this case one step closer to justice being done. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Santa Barbara County District Attorney Joyce Dudley.
Whew, what a day. One case after another. I suspect all of us are just a bit traumatized and will never quite be the same after listening to that today. I've been a prosecutor for 30 years, and for 30 years I've looked into the heartbreaking, literally heartbreaking eyes of crime victims. For those who are most severely affected by a violent sexual assault, affected by seeing someone murdered, affected by feeling the pain of knowing their child is in the next room, their child is maybe not alive anymore, their child is witnessing a rape, and possibly their child will witness their mother being murdered. Those crime victims have a sadness in their eyes, and the only way I can describe it is as if a part of them has died. And I always wondered when talking to those crime victims if they would ever fully recover. For those many years, I also believed that justice delayed is justice denied. Today, there were so many emotions in the hours and hours that we all sat here. And I saw so much in the eyes of the crime victims, of DeAngelo's crime victims. And what I mostly saw was sadness and rage, and occasional bursts of bravery that were extraordinary. Then I also saw signs of peace as I would walk around and look into some of those crime victims' eyes and their loved ones. It was just the glimmer of peace. And I hope that that is a catalyst to spark the beginning of their healing process. I know many of them rightfully believed that this day would never come. But today did come, and even though their pain is still raw and their wait was painfully long, most of them are appreciative because they saw justice today. I know that's true for Debbie Domingo, Santa Barbara County victim. And for all of the other crime victims. And I believe they and I, and everybody in this room, and every district attorney who's here today, owe that to DA Schubert and her extraordinary staff. I also believe the people of Santa Barbara County owe our appreciation to the hardworking and gifted law enforcement officers who worked on this case over the last several decades. And for the past 4 years, I owe a great deal of debt to our remarkable Chief Assistant District Attorney, Kelly Scott, who did this so magnificently, and the people of Santa Barbara County are very lucky to have you. Thank you all for being here today. Please don't underestimate how traumatic this was for you to be in this room, and take care of yourselves. Thank you.
The next speaker is Ventura County District Attorney Greg Todd.
Well, today was indeed a very good day for the people. It was also a very good day for our justice system. I truly believe in my heart of hearts, justice was achieved today. But my fervent hope, my prayer, is that it was a good day for the many victims that were so harmed, whose lives were altered, whose lives were taken by this terrible predator. And this day would not have been possible without the visionary leadership of my good friend, Sacramento District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. She got the ball rolling on this. All of us had been convening task force efforts, groups of investigators and detectives and prosecutors to try to bring this case to closure. Unfortunately, we had an investigator who came up with an idea out of left field, and rather than sitting on that, Anne Marie Schubert acted. And we are here today largely because of that. So I want to thank my good friend. I want to thank all my elected colleagues for their partnership. I want to thank the members of this courageous team that put this prosecution together. I especially want to thank my Chief Assistant District Attorney, Cheryl Temple, who is an extraordinary capital case prosecutor who I believe contributed mightily to the resolution of this case. You know, detectives, investigators, and prosecutors have a habit when they're handling significant cases of affixing a picture of the victim to the wall in their office, to their computer screen, or placing it under a clear plastic on their desk. And we do this because we want to be reminded of what the case is all about and why that case is important and what our duty and our obligation is to those individuals. But still, notwithstanding those efforts, passage of time during a lengthy hunt for a predator, or lengthy legal proceedings in court where we're trying to mount evidence against a predator, can cause our focus on those victims to be blurred a bit. We can kind of miss their importance, the importance of their life, their significance of their life, and their value to their loved ones and to their community. But thank God, their families, their survivors never forget. And they never allow us to forget about that importance, about the value of those lost ones in their lives. In today's plea hearing, we sought to remember and refocus the attention of all, of our entire criminal justice system, of the community, the larger media, the state of California, on the many lives that were impacted by this predator and their survivors whose lives were forever altered by crimes this defendant, this predator, has now admitted before all. In this spirit, I want to briefly personalize Lyman and Charlene Smith. Lyman Smith was a gentleman. He was a very successful lawyer in Ventura County. He was a partner in a prestigious law firm in Ventura County, and by all accounts, he was on the cusp of receiving a gubernatorial appointment to the Superior Court in Ventura County. He had 3 children, one of whom is with us today, Jennifer, who loved him and adored him, and who he loved and adored. He cared about people, he cared about his community, and he adored his beautiful wife, Charlene. And Charlene, well, she was one of those rare individuals who had a zest and a passion for life. Her desires in life, more than anything else, were to love and be loved by others. And at the time of her killing, friends would acknowledge that she was as happy as she had ever been in her entire lifetime. So with today's events, I hope we honor their memory. I hope we honor the memory of all those victims who were lost to this terrible, terrible predator. Though many years have passed, time is not always the great healer we'd like to believe it is for those who are left behind. Beyond their own loss, they also had to experience the additional pain of learning that there were so many others here in the state of California that had suffered similar horror and trauma at the hands of this cruel serial killer and serial rapist. So it is my hope that despite the limitations of our justice system and the frailties of our justice system, the best system man has ever designed, that today's proceeding provides a measure of hope and a measure of comfort to those survivors who carry on, who endure in the face of their loss. And now I briefly want to focus on the plea decision because I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about that. The defendant has now pled guilty to 13 murders with special circumstances in a number of them, 13 kidnaps for purposes of robbery, and he's additionally admitted his responsibility for 161 crimes involving 48 individual victims and 32 crime scenes. And those additional crimes, by the way, could not have been charged because of California's statute of limitations. The role of a district attorney in effectuating a result like this is complicated. It's not simple. And weighing the decision to seek death or seek life without possibility of parole is among the most solemn and difficult responsibilities we bear as elected district attorneys. While we represent the people of the state of California in seeking appropriate punishment for violent and vicious crimes, we also have a constitutional mandate, a constitutional duty to consider the lives of surviving victims and the desires of surviving victims. And here, any reasonable weighing of the aggravating and mitigating circumstances would compel seeking the death penalty against this defendant. I'm a supporter of the death penalty. I believe in it. And the plea today in no way changes my view that this predator richly deserves the ultimate penalty under California's system of guided discretion for capital punishment. But in the end, I and my colleagues concluded that seeking death did not serve the best interest of the victims in this unique and decades-old serial rape killing case. The inevitable delays, the lengthy year-long, perhaps decade-long litigation that would have ensued, and the probability that given his age, the defendant would likely die before his trial and certainly before any execution could be carried out. And for those victims whose crimes fell outside the statute of limitations, they would never have been given an opportunity to see and hear the defendant, as he did today, admit what he did to them, admit how he impacted and harmed their lives. The victims in this case have lived far too long with this trauma. They've suffered for far too many years. Simply put, they deserve to see the defendant die in prison as a convict and not simply the accused. And that is the reason we chose this result, which I think is a just and a fair result in this horrific case. Thank you.
The last speaker before we take questions is Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer.
Thank you very much. Before I make my comments, I just want to thank my team. I want to thank Pat Dixon, Debbie Lloyd, Dennis Conway, Larry Poole was here, many of you know, investigator extraordinaire. Erica Hutchcraft from the Sheriff's Department has been working on this case for over 20 years. There are those who came before them in the District Attorney's office, just like all of our offices. There are people that have been working on this case for decades. And so I just count myself blessed to be part, and I would like to acknowledge my predecessor, Mr. Rakakis, who signed the complaint from Orange County, and he was obviously one of the leaders in the DNA movement for many, many years as well. Anne Marie, I just want to say publicly to you and to all my colleagues on the stage, to all of you who shepherded this case to today, I am just so impressed as a career prosecutor, your dedication to the word justice and what you achieved today. It's literally amazing. And some of the victims, you're still here listening to us, and I appreciate you staying. Today was a very difficult day for me because our world and our society is upside down. And while the nation is talking about defunding the police, the reason we got to a solution of this crime is because we support law enforcement. Those of you in law enforcement, career prosecutors and sworn and non-sworn, you are our heroes. I mean, the 5 of us up here, 6 of us, sorry. Yeah, 6. We had to huddle up and decide if we were going to seek death. As Greg said, that is one of the most difficult decisions for a prosecutor to make. We had to back away from that because of very, very compelling reasons, and it was very difficult. Today, as I sat here and listened to 7.5 hours of recitation of crimes, I continually asked myself, did I make the right decision? I will go to my grave. Honestly, this was probably one of the most important decisions I ever had to make in my life. Deciding to go for death and then not going for death. But I'm not one of the victims and one of the family members. And there were 2 giants in this room today with us. And that was Bruce and Ron Harrington. In 2004, the 3 surviving brothers funded Prop 69, the DNA initiative. They asked me to be one of the statewide co-chairs of that initiative. That's why I stood up here today and took the factual basis for Keith and his wife, because I felt like I owed the family that because of what we worked together since the last 16 years. Genealogical DNA, without a doubt, has broken through crime solving. But DNA in 2004 broke through crime solving as well. They work hand in glove. They are part and parcel. They're critical. And I'm just so indebted to Bruce and Ron being here today. And so thank you. The case is so disturbing to me for this reason. it doesn't follow God's plan. You don't bury your children when you're a parent. Janelle Cruz was buried by her mom. That's not God's order of things. You don't have your kids have to witness your parents being beaten and killed and your mother sexually assaulted. That's not the order of life. That is something that no one in their wildest dreams could ever perceive. It's not God's plan. When a man is bound by his spouse, and then he's belittled and berated while his wife is sexually assaulted, and he can't protect his family, that's not God's plan. That's why this is so hard. Because I'm a husband and a father too. And if I couldn't protect my family or my children or my wife, that's not God's plan. So I've been upset all day. And I know my colleagues have been upset. And they're right. This is a significant and landmark accomplishment. It is. And we should really celebrate that. And I cannot wait until August for the victim impact statements. That is a celebration of what you have all been through. But I don't want anybody to leave here, the journalists or the career prosecutors or any of us as electeds who started, many of us, we were career prosecutors. I don't want anybody to think that no matter what the decisions that were made in this case that District Attorney Totten explained, or all of us will have to explain, I don't want anybody to think a couple things, that we know we got it right, that we're firm in our decision making, and that we'll always say that was the right decision. We did the best we could for the victims. I can submit to you that if all of the victims' families from the 4 murders in Orange County had not agreed to life without the possibility of parole, I would not have agreed to this. It came down to me, to the victims. I had to put aside my own personal belief and conviction. And I thought, and I do think, that that's what's going to save me from this constant consternation that I went through all day today. So I just want to say this since we're all together. We have a phenomenal country, man, with phenomenal values, and a dedicated law enforcement and people who care about the system. And I just hope as we leave that this case serves as an example of the difference between right and wrong and what we believe in and our values as a society. Because I am scared about the direction this nation is going and its lack of commitment to law enforcement. This case was solved because of the dedication of law enforcement. And unfortunately, there will be other victims in the future, and they deserve dedicated law enforcement working to protect them as well. Greg and I are sitting at the end of this stage, and that's where the convict sat all day. And there's a real weird aura for me over there. Anne-Marie described this as Hannibal Lecter. I will tell you, I swear I saw the devil today. That is the devil. Anybody who can do what he did over and over and over and seem to relish it over and over and over is the devil. So thank you, my friends, for what you did. Thank you for what you did. You're amazing people. You're all amazing people to the victims and to the professional staff. And I can just not thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. What a difference in my life you have made. This is a life-changing event, and you all were part of it. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to now open it up for questions. Before you begin, what a coincidence, you happen to be right in front of the microphone. That we have a microphone over there. We'd ask that people who want to ask questions go ahead and queue up 6 feet behind the speaker, unless you have a mask on, and ask your questions from there. A couple of important caveats. One, we're only going to answer questions directly related to this case, so please keep your questions directed in that manner. And secondly, many of you already know this, and for those of you who don't, I'm telling you this again, and for those of you who do, I'll remind you, prosecutors are bound by certain legal and ethical obligations that prevent us from providing certain information. So there will be questions. I don't hope there won't be questions, but there might be questions that we may not be able to answer fully, and there will probably be questions that we won't be able to answer at all. Like I said, I hope not, but if that happens, we'll let you know. We also have privacy issues potentially with our victims that could arise that would limit what we can say about certain things. And one final thing that you might not have thought about, but we think about all the time, is we want to maintain the integrity of not only this investigation, but future investigations. So that could limit what we say or what we can respond, how we can respond to certain questions. So with that in mind, I'll open it up to the first question. And before you do that, Sam, I guess I'll just look down and we'll see who feels comfortable or best at answering the questions that would come up, okay?
And well, I'll try one of those questions.
Okay.
I think the common refrain from family members and victims we've spoken to today is they don't believe DeAngelo is a frail, wheelchair-bound, infirm individual. They think that this has been an act for the past 2 years. Obviously, Ian, referred to that in his statement today when he talked about what DeAngelo was doing just prior to his arrest. Is this an act?
Who would like to answer that?
Sam Stanton with the
Start with
Sacramento
Anne
Bee.
Marie. Thanks, Sam.
I think there's a couple things that need to be said is, first of all, the court couldn't take his plea unless he's competent to stand trial. He has a whole team of lawyers, very qualified lawyers that obviously have worked with him for a couple of years now. But secondly, I think that the statement that Mr. Tinho presented us with at the beginning was pretty clear evidence, of what he was doing back in 1979 when caught with the dog repellent and the hammer, and his feigning of illness and really what we call in the legal world malingering, which is faking it. And then we fast forward to 2018, and the day or two before he's arrested, he's racing down the freeway on a motorcycle with very strategic counter-surveillance moves against the sheriff's department's team. And then within a day of that, he's then in an interview room. You're hearing these similar types of behavior that he had when he was arrested back when he was caught with a dog repellent. And then within a day or so of that, he's then wheeled into court, and he looked like he was today. So if you were to put that evidence in front of a jury, I think you could conclude one thing. And I think those victims know exactly what's going on in Mr. DeAngelo's head.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm Matthias Gaffney with the San Francisco Chronicle.
Okay.
In securing this plea deal, did you learn anything from Mr. DeAngelo, perhaps about a motive or what led him to target certain people or come to certain areas? He mentioned, hearing, almost sounded like hearing voices when you mentioned how when he was arrested, he was talking to himself and bringing up certain things about hearing voices, that kind of thing. Can you mention anything about that?
I think that's one of those questions we're not going to be able to answer right now, so I'm sorry about that. I think it's fair to say we didn't gain any extra information as a result of the plea. That was sort of the way you phrased that question. We didn't get extra information in exchange for the plea. But further than that, I can't say anything more than that.
Thank you.
Todd Thompson, the Associated Press. And maybe this is what you're referring to, but the alter ego after his arrest, is that something that you guys view as part of sort of an act situation here? Can you expound on that a bit?
I think that probably, I think I'm speaking for everybody here, that probably fits, again, I'm sorry, but I think that fits into one of those categories where we told you what we can say. We put that in the statement of the factual basis statement intentionally, because those are the things we could say, but it has to stay with that.
Hi there, Ventura with ABC 10. It was mentioned that litigation otherwise would have taken, could have taken 10 years or so. In this highly publicized case, there's also a lot of Californians who are talking about, the cost savings for taxpayers if it had gone on. Can someone talk to me about the impact on the cost if this had gone to litigation?
Tim, Greg?
I think I drew the short straw. There's no question that capital litigation is time-consuming and costly. On the other side of the equation, housing somebody in state prison for life without possibility of parole is also costly. Our big concern and focus was more on the delays that would have really impacted the case. We knew that we had already lost a number of victims. I think Mr. Ward mentioned a victim in his jurisdiction that had passed away, key witness in the case, and we were losing other witnesses as well. And so just from a practical standpoint and actually bringing the case to trial and mounting a prosecution case, we were in jeopardy from the standpoint of being able to put on evidence because we were losing witnesses. A case that spans 45 years presents some very unique challenges in that regard. But I think more fundamentally, a driving force, and I think we've all hinted at this in the decision-making process, more so than cost, more so than mounting a case, was just what it meant for the victims who had so long suffered for this, and there would be further delays that would just continue the trauma for them. So we saw, making a decision, a difficult decision for us, as the right thing to do for the victims of this predator. I hope that answers your question.
Is there a dollar amount that you could put on if it had gone to litigation?
There's all kinds of research studies that talk about the cost of capital punishment versus life without possibility of parole, and I wouldn't want to challenge that area. It's expensive, there's no question about that. But you think about the scope of the crimes this man committed and the harm he has done and the cost of that harm to individual victims' lives who were changed, it probably impacted employment, it probably impacted health. It impacted so much in their lives that is priceless, that you can never give them back. And so I think we have to take into account those kinds of costs as well.
Hi, George Warren from CBS 13.
Okay, hi, George.
Hi.
This will be, we have two questions
Okay.
coming up, so this will be.
I think a lot of people, myself included, thought that he may never have been caught because he's dead or serving time for other crimes. By my math, the last homicide, 86, he would have been about 40. So how could a guy, or any thoughts, theories on a guy so depraved who derives such enjoyment from his crimes, why he would stop at such a relatively young age?
That's a great question that has been discussed. I'm not sure how much we can go into that. We have these question and answers, and you're asking very reasonable questions.
But it is unusual, is it not, for a serial killer to stop?
I think everyone would agree it would be unusual, yes. And there's probably people who debate whether he did stop or didn't stop, but as far as we know, he did. I think that's fair to say, and that's about as far as we can go.
Thank you.
That's it. Do we have any remote questions?
Yes, one from Tom Bolton, News Hawk, Santa Barbara. Can someone explain how DeAngelo came to be in the various communities, especially Santa Barbara and Southern California?
Sorry, these are some of the facts of the case we can't talk about. Now, that's probably one that we can talk about potentially anyway. Won't commit everyone to that, but after the sentencing, we might be able to explain some of those things. There was a lot of investigation into, obviously, once he was caught, everyone wanted to find out whether there was a connection between him and the community. So there was an investigation into that, and maybe we can go into that in August.
This is a question for District Attorney Spitzer. This is from Nick Gerda at the Voice of OC. We want to get your perspective on the apparent transfer of half the Orange County evidence in the Golden State Killer case out of the Sheriff's Department into the home of author Michelle McNamara when it was still an open case. When did you learn about that, and what was your reaction? Did this movement of evidence affect the course of the prosecution? And more broadly, should these kinds of evidence transfers be happening to private citizens, particularly when cases are still active?
So that's a long question. Let me see if I just get to the heart of the matter as I understand it. So there was a motion recently filed in Orange County Superior Court by one of the public defenders in Orange County alleging that there was some issues on chain of custody with respect to documents related to this case that we litigated today and we're still litigating with respect to Mr. DeAngelo, and whether or not the Orange County Sheriff's Office released documents and failed to protect the chain of custody. There's absolutely no evidence that that's true. The defense was fully informed in Mr. DeAngelo's case about the fact that Michelle McNamara was given by the Orange County Sheriff's Department at some point some copy of police reports and other documents, non-evidence-based documents, and that she was using them either to help research who the Golden State Killer might be at that time. Whether or not she had ideas for a book at that time, I'm not personally aware. But there's just no evidence either that we failed in any way whatsoever to disclose that in this case, or that there was any problem with the chain of custody in any Orange County case. So I personally think it's much ado about nothing, but I also now have to litigate that in an Orange County Superior Court on a non-Golden State Killer case. So we'll deal with that in due course in Orange County.
Okay, it sounds like that's all the questions we have.